Hello friend, welcome to Philosol. My name is Ollie and today I would like to cover a simple but crucial concept, and this concept is used to guide our choices, our beliefs, and pretty much all of life's important decisions. Obviously I think it's quite important, and I call it the principle. And the principle is a principle that states that by principle a principle must be a principle. Although I suppose you probably want some further explanation for that, so to help illustrate my point, let's define principle. What do I mean when I say principle? I have some definitions here from dictionary.com and merriam-webster.com. So let's take a look here. So dictionary.com has a few. An accepted or professed rule of action or conduct. A fundamental, primary, or general law or truth from which others are derived. That part is important. A fundamental doctrine or tenet, distinctive ruling opinion, a personal or specific basis of conduct or management, guiding sense of the requirements and obligations of right conduct, an adopted rule or method for application in action. And let's look at Merriam-Webster here, it has a few more. A comprehensive and fundamental law, doctrine, or assumption, a rule or code of conduct, a primary source with respect to fundamentals. Fundamental, self-evident truth, natural law from which information, beliefs, and actions can be guided. Principles are the core kernels of truth that can't be argued, that we can use to derive the right actions from because we have the right information and guidance. So you may have picked up on this already, but there's an important rule, principle, that a principle must follow in order to be counted as a principle, and this is inherent. A principle must be true in all situations that it is to be applied. There's no wiggle room for personal judgment here. And this is because a principle must be used as a source of guidance, right? An inherent basis from which we can derive our decisions or beliefs. So, if this is the case, which it is, then a principle must be true no matter the extreme, right? It's easy to say, okay, well, we'll do it this way now. Once it gets heavier, more intense, we'll change it up. Well, then it's not a principle, right? It must always hold true so that it can always be gleaned from. And if a principle can't do that, then it's not a principle, it's a preference. So the principle states that a principle has to be this self-evident natural truth in order to be called a principle truthfully, right? And it may seem a little silly or redundant or obvious, but it is really important to understand that a principle has to be consistent. You can't pick and choose where it applies. It will always apply no matter how it's dressed up, right? And more on that in a bit. A principle looks at the core factors of a situation, and if those factors are true, if they apply to the situation, then so does the principle. So one of the reasons why this is important is in the case of, say, debates, right? Which is all the rage these days. People debating about politics, religion, beliefs, whatever it is, things that are important to them. But the problem is many people don't really base their stance in sound principles, right? Maybe it's based in preconceived beliefs or selfish goals, whether they're conscious of it or not, or fitting in with a crowd or what they're comfortable believing, or maybe it's just based on partial information or misguided principles that aren't actually based in truth. And we've all done this, I think, at some point in our lives, whether it's because of our parents or whatever, but we simply believe what we were taught to believe. And so then we end up never really checking these beliefs against proven, sound, self-evident principles, right? So when you do base your beliefs upon self-evident truth, proven, sound principles, then you can't really go wrong, right? Your beliefs are then based in fact, and if your belief aligns with fact, then your belief is factual. A simple principle would be human equality. This is self-evident. We're all humans, therefore we all have equal human rights. There's no reason why we should have more or less than someone else. And of course there might be people trying to come up with reasons why that's not the case. It might be race, gender, where you're from, your wealth, beliefs, whatever. That's called bigotry. We try not to do that. And ultimately those things are non-factors. They do not supersede the fact that we are all human. So, and this one's a real mind blower. Because of that self-evident principle, right, that we're all human, we cannot justify stealing each other's stuff, of course. So, and it doesn't matter how we dress it up. It doesn't matter if I'm stronger than you. If I do it under some pretense or title, if you have more than me, or even if I do it with good intentions trying to help somebody out who's in need, which, by the way, charity is not charity if you use someone else's wealth. The fact that we shouldn't steal is always true because it's based in a principle, right? If I steal from you, I'm not respecting your basic humanity. Therefore, that goes against a principle. One thing I should touch on is when to apply principles, and on the flip side, are there ever any exceptions to principles? So, how do we know when to apply principles? It has to do with clear definitions for the words that describe the situations in which the principle becomes relevant. So let's say theft. We need to understand that theft is taking something that belongs to someone else without permission. So of course, buying and selling isn't theft because the transfer of property was agreed upon. Taking something back that was stolen from you isn't theft because you're only taking something that is rightfully yours. So like from your perspective, if you were stolen from, the principle that proves that theft is immoral, we shouldn't do it, that does not in that moment apply to you because you're only taking back something that has already been proven to be rightfully yours. So we have the self-evident truth that we're all human, from which we derive the self-evident principle that we all have equal rights, from which we derive the fact that we shouldn't steal, and stealing is taking something without any right or permission. And that's a very simple example, but that's basically how it works. So to know when and how a principle applies to a situation, we have to understand the factors that cause the principle to be relevant and the definitions for those factors. Are there exceptions to principles? What is an exception, and what if there are two principles that seem to contradict each other? Well, an exception would be some special case where a principle doesn't apply when it normally would, and as we already established, this doesn't happen with principles. It can't happen with principles. They have to be true in all situations. So if that does happen, then you're not working with a principle. And because a principle is an ideology that is derived from self-evident natural truth, it is impossible for one principle to contradict another principle because it is impossible for two truths to contradict each other, right? They can't both be true. If they contradict each other, that means one or both truths are not true. So any principles that are based on something isn't true can't actually contradict a principle because it's not really a principle, it's not based in truth. So principles naturally make room for other principles because they're all based in truth. A decent example of how we might discuss this would be a nasty thing, violence, right? And it can be easy to say that, you shouldn't enact violence, but the principle isn't so much don't enact violence as much as it is don't violate somebody else's rights. And the term violence, just throwing it out there, could mean violate somebody's rights in any way, not just, punching them. So if they enact violence against you, then they broke your rights. They violated your rights. So bear with me here. So look at the principle of human equality, which we've already touched on a lot. So if we're equal, we all have equal rights. There's no reason for me to have more or less rights than you. So if someone does violate my rights, and there's a principle that can't be broken saying that we're all equal, then that person just gave up their rights in equal measure to how they tried to give up mine. This is equality, right? So you have to give up your rights as you trespass other people's rights. This is self-evident based on the principle of human equality. You are not trespassing rights by defending yourself if they already trespassed yours. You see, your rights didn't actually stop them, unfortunately. You still have every right to not be attacked, but because your rights were bypassed by this person, they bypassed their rights too because they're equal to you. The equality still applies even if your rights are broken. Ideally, violence wouldn't happen at all, and this could happen if we all really respected equal human rights, because then there would never be any need for violence or retaliation. Funny how that works, right? But anyway, you may see me on my videos talking about these things and breaking them down really simple, and it might come across as really obvious out loud or even pointless, but that's kind of what I want to show with this topic, is that it's from these simple and true and seemingly obvious principles. These are very important. It's from those that we can guide all of our beliefs and actions, right? I mean, how often do we make things more complex, or deliberately or not, we dilute the situation with things that are ultimately non-factors, and they may not even be based in truth. I'm sure that if you've ever been in a debate, which this day and age who hasn't, right? You may have found that either your belief or their belief wasn't actually based in self-evident truth, right? Or maybe we simply end up getting confused in our lives, right? Because we end up thinking about things or not thinking about things that are important for us, but we think about them in a way that doesn't really hold up to principles, right? And we end up taking the principles for granted because they seem so obvious or possibly even unimportant. So to try and explain it in one sentence, and I have it written down here, so please bear with me. The principle states that in order to be a principle, the ideology must inherently be self-evident and naturally true in all situations, no matter the extreme, so that beliefs, information, and actions can be derived from it consistently and justifiably. And that's a little long-winded, but I think that's a pretty good way of putting it. I mean, it's really important for me to keep in mind for myself. It helps me work through these messy situations. And of course, some people sometimes do act out of greed or personal bias, but when we do try to do the right thing, it's really a shame to mess ourselves up because we're focusing on things that aren't important or aren't even genuine. You know, I realized in the past where I was making exceptions for principles, and this only causes problems and makes things harder. I learned that you cannot live at your best when you aren't even living how you believe you should. I've been really excited to share this one. It's a little hard to explain at first, but once you get it, it's very simple, and I think it's one of the most crucial things that we really need to keep in mind in today's world. I really hope you got something really great out of this, that you learned a lot. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it, and please feel free to share your thoughts, your perspective, your experiences in the comments below. And feel free to share Phil Soul with anybody and everybody that you think will get good out of it. I really want to help as many people as possible. Much love.